getting my spine into proper alignment and then maintaining that with once-a-week chiropractic care was a huge impact on my body's ability to heal. Organic, pasture-raised, local meats are some of the most healing foods that are out there. All of those things built up to be a significant impact on my overall health and ultimately kicking my IC to the curb.
In a world obsessed with convenience and quick fixes, I'm approaching wellness differently. After healing from chronic illness by overhauling my entire life, I'm now on a mission to help women like me to thrive and not just survive. I'm Kristen, and you're listening to the Organamama Podcast. Hey friend, thanks for listening to today's episode of the Organamama Podcast. If you're looking for more ways to dive deeper into low-tox living, I want to tell you about my Organa Guides. In 2024, I wrote a series of digital guides that walks you through exactly how to rid your home of toxic possessions and chemicals, from kitchen equipment to bedding to paint to baby toys to your clothes and accessories. You'll learn exactly what materials and ingredients to avoid, what materials and ingredients are safe, and which brands and products I recommend as good, healthy options for your family. Listeners of the Organamama Podcast can get 20% off any of my Organa Guides using code PODCAST, and I've linked all the guides in the show notes for you below. As always, do your best and let go of the rest.
Welcome back to the Organamama Podcast. Today, I'm going to be sharing with you about my personal experience with chronic illness, which was a diagnosis of interstitial cystitis. So my story begins really back in 2018 when I got married. My husband and I were 21 years old, and we got married in the summer in between our junior and senior year of college, and we left for our honeymoon. And on my honeymoon, I developed the horrible symptoms of a urinary tract infection, which we assumed was just that, a UTI. But what I didn't realize was it was the start of a chronic illness for me called interstitial cystitis that I suffered from for 2 full years. Yes, it completely interrupted my honeymoon and changed the trajectory of the beginning of my marriage. And if you want to hear the entire story of exactly what happened to me and how we worked through that, if you go all the way back to the beginning of the Organamama Podcast episodes, the second episode is called My Crunchy Origin Story, and I tell that whole story in great detail of exactly what happened. But today I want to talk to you specifically about the details of interstitial cystitis, because this is a disease that plagues many, many women, some men, and oftentimes goes without a diagnosis and with no solution. I was able to heal from my interstitial cystitis within 2 years, which was kind of against all odds, because when I first got diagnosed by my urologist, he told me that this is usually a lifelong disease, there is no cure, and many people just try to search for ways to manage their symptoms without ever actually healing from the disease itself. Interstitial cystitis, or IC as I'm going to refer to it, is a diagnosis of exclusion, meaning that you get the diagnosis because everything else that it could be gets ruled out. So there's actually a pretty wide range of what could fall under the category of IC, simply because whatever it is that you have can't be explained by any other means or reason. So IC, interstitial cystitis, is a chronic autoimmune inflammatory disease, which means that it is caused by inflammation in the body, and it impacts usually the urinary tract system. So the kidneys, the bladder, the urethra, the ureter, that entire system where your urine is being created and excreted is impacted by inflammation, which usually results in significant amounts of pain. And a lot of times that's going to result in symptoms that feel a lot like having a UTI, but there's no actual infection present, which was the case for me. And again, I explained all of that in the podcast episode titled My Crunchy Origin Story. So go listen to that if you want to hear all the details of what my symptoms looked like and what my experience was with that. But I want to tell you a little bit about how I was able to actually heal from this chronic illness without going on any pharmaceuticals and without it impacting the rest of my life, which seems to be a very uncommon experience for women that are diagnosed with IC. So when I was first diagnosed by my urologist at the age of 21, he handed me a pamphlet and said, in this pamphlet, there are certain things that people have found to be helpful, but some of them don't help some people, and many people never really see much relief. So good luck, try what you can in here, and hopefully it won't be too bad, but you'll most likely experience symptoms of this for the rest of your lifetime. And honestly, I at age 21, full of vigor and energy, I was like, screw that. Like, I'm not gonna just assume that my life is gonna be plagued by this chronic illness that is really, really hard and painful for the rest of my life. And so I started doing a lot of research, trying to understand, what is IC? What can cause IC? Why do I have it? And there's really kind of several factors that were at play for my diagnosis. And obviously, if you're experiencing IC, what caused mine may not be the same things that has caused yours. So I think that's important to recognize, but I also couldn't really find many other people's experiences of dealing with interstitial cystitis when I was diagnosed. So I think people sharing their stories and saying, hey, this is what I experienced, can be super helpful. So there's definitely a few factors that were at play for me. One, a huge one, was nutrition. And this is probably what you're going to read anywhere that you're researching on the internet or in like Facebook groups where people are talking about IC, is that what you eat has a direct impact on how your symptoms are showing up. This is because food has a major inflammatory or anti-inflammatory impact on the body. So a lot of people, there's certain foods that for them will trigger a lot of inflammation and therefore trigger the symptoms of their IC. For me, it felt like a UTI, burning with urination, a lot of swelling and discomfort kind of around the clock. And that turned into flares. So I would sometimes have days or weeks where I felt nothing, and then I would have a flare where the pain would get really bad. Then it would subside after a certain amount of time. And over time, my flares got shorter and farther apart until I no longer had flares anymore. That was about 2 years after my diagnosis, and I haven't had a single flare in over 6 years. So how did I get to that point? How is that possible? I made a massive change in my entire lifestyle. Like everything that I was doing in my life to live the way I was living when I got diagnosed, I changed it. Like I changed everything about my whole life, essentially. And like I said, diet is one of those biggest pieces. So a lot of people struggle with IC symptoms from citric foods, citrusy, acidic foods. So things like tomatoes, pineapple, anything that like has a high acidity to it. Tomatoes, and it can be one of the biggest triggers for a lot of people because that acidity impacts your urine, and then that can really bother the inflammation in your, your urethra, your bladder, and cause a lot of discomfort. So initially I went on an elimination diet after my diagnosis where I cut out high inflammatory and high acidic foods. So I was eating basically the AIP diet, which is actually something I would recommend if you have a new IC diagnosis, is starting with the AIP diet. Now, I think it's important to mention that this diet it's the autoimmune protocol diet, and this is recommended for people that are dealing with autoimmune disease kind of no matter what it is. This diet is not a diet that is meant to be followed for life because it is very, very strict. And it can be really helpful to do an elimination diet to help reduce the inflammation in your body for a season, but it's really not meant to be a permanent thing. And so some people need to do the AIP diet for a few weeks. Some people need to do it for a few months. Some people may need to do it for a few years, but ultimately the goal is always to be able to reintroduce a lot of those foods over time as you figure out what your body is most reactive to, and also just healing your gut from the inside out, because gut health has a huge impact on inflammation in the body and autoimmune disease like IC. So for me, that meant cutting gluten, dairy, sugar, and tomatoes, and other like high acidic foods like pineapple, for example, and like things that were vinegar based and stuff like that. That was a really hard way to eat because prior to that, I had been eating the standard American diet, which was a lot of fast food, soda, candy, carbs, gluten, and dairy. That was the majority of my diet. So I had to really pivot and do a completely new way of eating, which was a struggle. But I noticed almost immediately a change in my amount of symptoms. So I cannot stress this enough, the importance of focusing on a low inflammatory diet and figuring out what foods are triggers for you. Some people, it's like chocolate, like dark chocolate triggers their IC symptoms. So keep a food log, try to figure out what did you eat in the 24 to 48 hours prior to a flare, and can you draw any connections between that food and having a flare? Hopefully you'll be able to reintroduce many foods eventually. I ended up reintroducing everything except for gluten, and I've been almost completely gluten-free now for 7 or almost 8 years, with the exception of einkorn flour, organic whole grain einkorn flour that I cook with at home. But otherwise, I do not consume gluten because bleached enriched flour that we're getting in the United States in gluten-containing items is just very high inflammatory no matter how you cut it, no matter who you are. And it's not great for the gut. It's not great for the body. So I just avoid it to be safe. So diet is so important. I have heard people saying that cutting red meat, helped their IC. Personally, I do not agree with this. I think that well-sourced meats, organic, pasture-raised, local meats are some of the most healing foods that are out there. Things like bone broth, pasture-raised eggs, and grass-fed, pasture-raised red meat and chicken. These are very, very nutrient dense and actually can heal the gut lining in a lot of ways and help reduce inflammation in the body. I also focused heavily on fibrous foods, organic fruits and vegetables, and cutting back overall on carbs to help regulate my blood sugar. Blood sugar is something I've learned about more in the last few years, but anywhere I could cut back, especially on processed sugar or processed carbs, that helped lower my overall inflammation levels in my body a lot. So changing my nutrition was a huge piece in healing from IC. And immediately upon switching up the way I was doing my eating, I noticed that my flares got significantly less intense and would last a lot less time than they did initially. The other kind of causes for IC that I believe were factors for me were twofold. One is that interstitial cystitis is heavily linked to mold exposure. Now, if mold is something that you're like, wait, what? What does that possibly have to do with an autoimmune disease? It actually has a lot to do with autoimmune disease. And in a lot of health studies, IC and mold sickness, mold illness, and mold exposure are heavily linked. And in my personal case, I know that this was part of the root cause of my IC. I had been exposed to many moldy buildings and homes over the course of my lifetime, and I actually have an entire course on mold. So if you're like, this is a completely foreign concept to me, I have no idea what that even could mean, I have a course for beginners. It's about a 2-hour video course that you can watch on your own time. It's called The Organomama's Guide to Mold. I will link it below in the show notes. Be sure to check that out, and that's going to give you kind of a holistic overview of mold and how it could be impacting you. And learning that information about mold actually might be the key piece in your IC that you're missing. Or even if you're dealing with a different autoimmune disease, that might be the piece that you're missing that you have not looked into yet. So I know that for me, mold was a huge factor in me developing IC. But another factor that I have actually never shared on the internet before for my interstitial cystitis was growing up in a Christian environment that was heavily under the influence of, I would consider, somewhat toxic purity culture. Now, this is obviously not going to apply to everyone, but there's a really interesting book out there. If you have not read The Body Keeps the Score, it's a very fascinating book that talks a lot about how the things that you experience as you're growing up, the different traumas and the different things that you're exposed to as you're being parented and disciplined, and the different societal pressures that you go through as a kid going through adolescence and puberty into adulthood can actually impact the way that your body responds and creates symptoms of illness in adulthood. And for me, it really does not surprise me that I ended up with a chronic illness that impacted my bladder and my more sensitive areas of my body after having grown up in a very purity culture heavy environment. in my Christian home. And I want to specifically say that this is not something that I necessarily blame my parents or my community for, because this is just the way things were. And my parents, like raising me the way I was raised, were doing the best they knew how to do to have children that were walking with the Lord. And it's a huge part of my story that Jesus Christ is the center of my life and is the most important thing to me and is the reason I live. But there are also parts of that spiritual upbringing that weren't totally right. And that's going to be true of literally any upbringing. Like every parent looks back at their childhood and thinks there are things I want to do differently than my parents did. And that's just true. But I think that there was a lot of pressure in the environment that I grew up in. I actually grew up as a missionary kid overseas for several years. There's a lot of pressure to meet certain like pretty legalistic standards of sexual purity and dressing modestly. And it just kind of infiltrated my brain to an unhealthy level as I was being raised. And then when you're in that Christian environment, when you're moving in the direction of marriage, it's very much like everything sexual is completely off limits. Everything is like not permissible. Like don't cross these boundaries. Don't like do these things. And then suddenly the minute you get married, it's like do all the things and it's all good and it's all right and go for it and have fun. And like this is very God honoring. And I think for me at age 21, that was really hard to understand of like 1 minute everything's off limits. The next minute everything is like go, go, go. You're good. Like enjoy it. And so the fact that I developed this like autoimmune disease that impacted those parts of my body within days of getting married and everything being quote unquote permissible, I do think that there's a definite connection there. And after reading The Body Keeps the Score, I think it connected a lot of dots for me of like, wow, I actually think that the specific like manifestation of an autoimmune disease in those body parts was not a coincidence. After some of the things that I wrestled with and struggled with from a mental standpoint growing up within pretty intense purity culture. So I think that's something to consider when it comes to autoimmune disease, is just from a mental health standpoint and like a childhood, adolescent, puberty standpoint. Like, is the places that your autoimmune disease is showing up, is there any relation to traumas that you've been through in those parts of your body or thoughts that you've had in your brain that might impact that system of your body? Because for me, there was definitely like a huge connection there. And that's actually something that I want to like dive into and explore more for myself in the future. But I definitely have thought about this a lot over time of like, I am not surprised that my autoimmune disease presented in the way that it did because of the way I was raised. So just something to chew on there. But let's go back to how I was able to heal from my interstitial cystitis, because I know that some of the root causes were, like I said, the way I was raised and like the purity culture aspect of things and how my body kind of turned that into an autoimmune disease in that area of my body, but also mold exposure and very, very terrible nutrition habits for most of my life. And I think all three of those things working together was kind of what caused my interstitial cystitis to come when it did in the way that it did. But I was able to heal. So let me talk a little bit more about what I did to get to that point.
Hey bestie, if you're pregnant, postpartum, or you just brought a brand new human into your house, this is for you. Indoor air can be up to 100 times more polluted than outdoor air, which I did not know until we lost our first home to mold. Since then, air quality has been a non-negotiable for our family. We use Air Doctor purifiers because they're low EMF, super quiet, and they filter dust, mold, pollen, pet dander, smoke, VOCs, and 99.97% of flu and COVID viruses. Basically, it's one less thing for your postpartum brain to worry about. Check the show notes and get up to $300 off Air Doctor. Protecting your baby starts with the air they breathe.
So obviously, like I mentioned, I changed my nutrition significantly, like massively changed it. Another huge change that I made to help lower inflammation levels in my body was to basically try and remove all environmental toxins that I possibly could remove from my home environment. So I started researching cleaning products, personal care products, furniture, literally anything you could imagine that you bring into a home. I started researching, like, is this toxic? What materials is this made of? And I began to teach myself how to read ingredient labels and recognize the types of ingredients that were causing major inflammation in my body. And it was shocking when I started going through all the products in my house to realize, like, this is toxic, this is toxic, this is toxic, this is toxic. Like, literally everything lined up on the counter of, like, oh my gosh, my toxic load must be so high because of all this stuff that's in my home that is not good for my health. And so slowly, little by little, we had a very small budget at the time as newlyweds in school. We started swapping out one thing at a time: laundry detergent, all-purpose cleaner, shampoo and conditioner, hand soaps, candles, rugs, furniture. Slowly, little by little, drip, 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 we started swapping out things in our home that were toxic. And within a few years, we had a mostly non-toxic home of non-toxic cleaning supplies, non-toxic personal care products. And in fact, I took all of that knowledge and turned it into a bunch of guides to help other people that want to do the same thing. So I actually have a guide called Organahome that covers everything in the home, like cleaning products, things in your kitchen that might be increasing your inflammation levels or increasing your toxic load, and things like your bedding and your mattress and what electronics you have in your home and how EMF exposure might actually be impacting your inflammation levels. I wrote a whole guide about that. That's called Organahome. I'll link it for you in the show notes. You can grab that. And then I also have a guide called Organa Beauty that covers all personal care products. And I know it has the word beauty in it, but it's actually personal care products for men, women, and children. So if you are in a home that has a man, a woman, or a child in it, which should be all of you, or not like all of you, but you're going to be one of those things if you're listening to this podcast. Organa Beauty covers all personal care product swaps and actually teaches you how to identify toxic ingredients on personal care product labels for yourself, so that you don't always have to just like look at something and be like, I can't pronounce any of that. I don't know what that is. I'm going to just buy it. You can actually reference Organa Beauty and reference your ingredient label and be like, oh, this, and this are things I should avoid, so I'm not going to buy that. So I'll link all of those guides for you below in the show notes. Grab whatever you need, and podcast listeners can get a 20% off discount with code podcast. So be sure to use that. But yes, swapping out toxic things in my home actually made a massive difference on my health. And I noticed a really significant change in how I felt and how my body was responding to those changes. And I noticed a direct correlation between reducing toxins in my home and the amount of symptoms I was experiencing from IC. So that was a massively important part of my healing journey. A lot of times people complain to me about like, well, non-toxic or holistic living is so expensive. But then I always come back to remind them that truly, like, the best ways to heal your body are free. And a lot of the things that I did to heal from IC were completely free. So getting outside was a huge thing. I spent a lot of time indoors. I was a wedding photographer at the time. And so I spent a lot of time inside on my computer, editing, answering emails, talking with clients. I obviously spent some time outside when I was like on the job, but a lot of my time was spent indoors. So I began to prioritize getting outside, getting fresh air, getting my feet on the earth, and getting sunlight. The sun is actually one of the most healing things in the entire world, literally. And if you can get outside, put your bare feet in the ground, get some sun on your face, that will do so much more for you than any supplement or gadget or anything in the non-toxic world can do. So make sure you're prioritizing that, because when I started prioritizing that, my IC flares significantly scaled back, and I noticed a huge difference in my health on the days that I would get outside, get some sun on my face, help regulate my circadian rhythm, help regulate my nervous system, and just take a breath, pray, and get centered and reconnect myself with my body. It was wildly helpful to start making that a daily practice. And I highly recommend that you do that if you're dealing with any kind of autoimmune issue, or even if you're not. It's just a healthy practice to do as a human being. I was one of those kids that literally grew up with a stack of those paper Dixie cups on my bathroom counter in my shared kids' bathroom. So I'd like wake up in the middle of the night if I was thirsty and just like run to the bathroom and grab one of those little Dixie cups and fill it up with like 3 times in a row with tap water and just like chug it and then go right back to sleep. So if you can relate to that, Heyo. But I had never really considered like the quality of my water or what I was adding to my water to optimize hydration until I was diagnosed with IC. So one of the things that's really, really important is to make sure that you're drinking filtered water, because tap water is actually full of so many contaminants, bacteria, VOCs, PFAS, like forever chemicals. It can also have heavy metals like lead, arsenic, mercury. There's just a lot of nasty stuff that's in tap water. So please don't drink straight from the tap. Please filter your water, and the quality of filter actually matters. So I've talked a lot about this on my Instagram page about like what type of water filter is best. But regardless of what water filter you're using, you want something that's going to be removing as many contaminants as possible, but you also want to make sure that you're getting the right amount of minerals in your water. That's going to be your sodium, your magnesium, your potassium, and your calcium. You want to be getting all of those in with your water. So a lot of times when you have a heavy filtration system on your water, those things are getting filtered out. So you want to make sure that you're adding them back into your water. So there's a lot of different electrolytes that can do a pretty good job of this, or trace minerals that you can add back into your drinking water that really helps with optimal hydration on a cellular level. And so when I started doing that, I also noticed a huge impact on my health, lowering my inflammation levels and lowering my amount of IC flares and symptoms. Ideally, an adult should be trying to aim for drinking half their body weight in ounces. So if you weigh 140 pounds, you want to be trying to drink 70 ounces of filtered and remineralized water every day, not just tap water. Filtered and remineralized is so important. So doing that was huge for me. Another really big, important thing that I changed in my life was proper movement of my body. Sitting stagnant on a couch, on a chair, in an office, laying in bed for the entire day is not normal, and it is not healthy. So if you are not getting up and walking around and getting outside and getting your steps in, you need to start. Because one of the biggest problems with the average American lifestyle is that people are stuck in cubicles, they're stuck in cars, they're stuck in chairs, and they're not moving. Your body needs to move. And if you're the person who has a job that requires a lot of sitting, ideally you want to be getting up every 45 minutes and taking a few laps or doing a few squats. Get that blood flowing and support your heart health, your cardiovascular health, and your overall inflammation levels are going to go down the more you can be regularly moving your body and getting that lymph flowing, removing any stagnancy from inside your system. And when I started getting into a habit of getting up and moving and walking and just getting my steps in, getting outside, like all of those things built up to be a significant impact on my overall health, lowering my inflammation levels, and ultimately kicking my IC to the curb. Now, there's also one other thing that I added in that was kind of a random thing that I added that I think played a massive part into the healing I experienced from IC, which was actually starting to see a chiropractor very, very frequently. Now, not all chiropractors are created equal, and I don't recommend just any old chiropractor. You don't necessarily want to be seeing like the pops and cracks guy who's like, come in when your shoulder hurts and I'll just fix you. But actually, the kind of concept of chiropractic care that I really subscribe to that really helped me a lot is this idea that your central nervous system impacts every part of your body. And so like if you think about your spinal cord and your central nervous system that runs down through your spine all the way from the top all the way down. And if you think about those diagrams of the nervous system, right, with these nerve endings that are going throughout all your limbs, your whole body, that nervous system is connected to every part of your body, every organ, every part of your limbs, your brain, your heart, your kidney, your liver. For me, my bladder, my urethra, my entire system that was being impacted by IC. If you have what they like to call in chiropractic lingo, if you have subluxations or things happening in your spine that are not fully aligned, if there's something is pinched or tweaked or not fully aligned the way it should be, that's going to impact those nerves that are connected to whatever part of your body is most impacted by that part of your nervous system. And it was very interesting because I started going to chiropractic care as I was dealing with IC. And I got x-rays done and they were looking at my spine, and I had major subluxations happening in my spine in the areas of the nerves that connect to my bladder and kidneys. Like, it's very interesting. They were like, yeah, your spine is like super, super off in this area. And they even showed me, they were like, this is the curvature you want to see here, and this is yours, and it's really off. And so I started going to the chiropractor 2 to 3 times a week initially. And then I was able to scale care back to once a week for maintenance. And they started really working on getting my spine into alignment. And what do you know? That was one of the major things that was happening at the time that I was healing from IC. And so I strongly believe that getting my spine into proper alignment and then maintaining that with once a week chiropractic care was a huge impact on my body's ability to heal, because that subluxation in that like lower part of my spine that's connected to those nerves that run to like my bladder, my urethra, once that subluxation was kind of improved upon, my IC, it healed significantly after that. So, I really, really love and support the idea of regular chiropractic care. In fact, we liked it so much that we started taking my kids. Like, as soon as I started having kids, all of my kids have been adjusted within a few hours of being born, and then once a week since then for their entire life, because I think it's so important to get those spines into alignment to help support the nervous system and like overall body function as best as possible from the very, very get-go. So those are all of the main things that I did that really healed my IC. And it was crazy because after I started focusing on all of that stuff, it was a lot of change over 2 years. And then I had one final flare that happened when I was in a pretty stressful season, because obviously stress can impact inflammation in the body. And I was pretty stressed. I had a flare. And then after that, my stress levels went down a lot just because of some life circumstances that changed. But I was, focusing on a proper nutrition, proper hydration, getting outside, getting lots of sleep at night, getting out in the sun, moving my body, focusing on all of these free foundations of health, essentially. And I never had another flare of IC after the summer of 2020. And so I think when I think about autoimmune disease and I think about IC, I think a lot about all of these people that I see in the Facebook groups who are talking about their autoimmune disease. And honestly, they sit there and just complain. Like, they type out their complaints of like, my life is so hard. No one understands. It's so hard, like, to be stuck in bed in pain. And like, I resonate with that. I was there. I actually thought I was going to have to drop out of college, and it was severely impacting my new marriage. And it was so, so hard. But I decided not to like let it win. And I think that that's a huge part of it, is the mindset of like, either you can say like, okay, yep, I have this autoimmune disease and it's just part of who I am, and that's just how things are going to be, and I'm just going to be sad and depressed about it, and I'm going to complain about it in these Facebook groups with people who get it and just try to commiserate with other people. Or I'm going to take my health into my own hands. I'm not even going to read the pamphlet that my doctor gave me, and I'm going to say, you know what? I'm going to figure out for myself exactly what is causing this inflammation in my body, and I'm going to change directions. I am going to alter the course of my life. And for me, that also involved a lot of prayer and getting down on my knees and asking God to heal me. And I ultimately believe that He is the divine healer, and He heals who He chooses to heal. And ultimately, yes, I could have done all the right things and still never experienced healing. And I think that God granted me that for whatever the reason was, out of His goodness. And if God doesn't heal you, that doesn't mean that like He's not good. And it doesn't mean that you're not worthy of being His child and walking with Christ. However, He has plans and He has power that we can't fathom and can't understand. And He orchestrates all things for His glory. And there are things in life that we can't understand, why some people get healed from chronic illness and some people don't. But the best thing that we can do is to say, you know what? I am going to do the most that I can with the life that God has given me, and I am going to choose to make the right changes to give myself the best chance of healing. So instead of like wallowing in my diagnosis and wallowing in my pain, I decided to say, you know what? No, I'm going to change my diet. I'm going to change my exercise. I'm going to change my sleep. I'm going to get all these toxins out of my house. I'm going to give my body the best possible chance to heal. And it did. And I would encourage you to do the same thing. Starting with your food and the toxins in your house. Those are the easiest things you can start doing to lower your inflammation load. And just the very basic foundations of health, like getting outside, getting in the sun, getting your steps in, drinking lots of water. These are really important basic things, and no supplement or gadget is really going to replace those free foundations of doing the right things that are essential to the human experience that God has created us for. So if you are walking through IC right now, if you're walking through autoimmune disease that is inflammation based, my heart goes out to you because I've been there. I understand how hard it is, but I also just want to encourage you to rise up and step up to make the changes that you need to make, to do the hard things, to sacrifice what you need to sacrifice, and to pray, because ultimately God is the great physician. And if he chooses to heal you, he chooses to heal you. And what a blessing and what a testimony that is. So that's my story of IC. I hope this helps. And if you have any questions, feel free to send me a DM on Instagram at the Organamama. I'm excited to connect with you. Thanks for listening, and we'll catch you on the next episode of the Organamama podcast.
If you just got that positive pregnancy test for the first time, welcome to pregnancy, where your cravings make no sense, your apps all disagree, and suddenly everyone on the internet is yelling at you. Should you be eating protein? And what actually happens at ultrasounds? Why does nobody explain the glucose test until it's happened already? That's why I created the Organamama's Guide to Pregnancy. It's like having a calm, informed, holistic best friend walk you through pregnancy and birth, trimester by trimester, without the fear-mongering or overwhelm. If you want less Googling at 2 a.m. and more like, oh, okay, I've got this, check the show notes, click the link, and grab the pregnancy guide. Podcast listeners can get 20% off with code PODCAST.